Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar news update video. And we have a pretty big one here because, as you can see, finally, official big public information about the Aang movie, but kind of offset by the fact that it is announcing a pretty big delay for the movie. So let's get into this. The positive is that it's been posted basically everywhere. Official Paramount account posting about this with the logo, date, title. Great. Official Avatar Legends account posting the exact same stuff. And even linking to an official page for the movie, which if you go to it here, they only have one post. Let me just refresh this. Actually, I've had this open for a while. Yeah, still one post. Legend of Aang movie, the official account for the movie. And they're posting about it here too. This is different than like every other time information has come out about this movie where it's either been maybe one of the accounts posts about it or it's just media articles that have posted about it because it's been mostly hidden in a Paramount press release or it's news coming out of CinemaCon where it's only kind of like half news. It is properly, locking down some of this information, it feels like, for the first time. Finally, we have stuff to direct people to when they ask about the movie. Well, follow this Instagram page. It's going to probably have all the information as it gets released. It's a specific thing you can point at. Like, here's the page for this movie. And I'm assuming as we go forward, we'll lean more and more in that direction. Let's do the breakdown on the logo while we're here. Unfortunately, I don't think there's too much to say. I think the text of Legend of Aang specifically is nice in the kind of yellow going into orange, a little bit of blue. I like the font choice for the kind of core part of the title. It is a little bit weird that then The Last Airbender is very much just tagged on in rather plain font afterwards, kind of highlighting that, like the title itself, it is just a bunch of Avatar branding words kind of like added together rather than being a really nice, neat title. It'll make it clear exactly what it is, but it's not super amazing to think about. Then you have the Air Nomad logo, the Airbender logo, behind the A. They're, I guess, maybe trying to do a thing where each side of the triangle kind of goes through the center of one of the kind of swirls that makes up the airbending logo. But it does sort of just feel like the A is blocking most of the logo to the point like you're kind of like, why is it there? I almost would have preferred this if it was basically this logo just moved after the G, just Legend of Aang, and then beside Legend of Aang you have the Air Nomad logo here, and then you have Last Airbender underneath, but in a sort of similar font to this. Like, you maybe keep the size, but it has the same font treatment as this rather than being super plain. It feels like a little bit cobbled together, kind of like the title itself, but it is nice to have, and I think it does stand out. I think like the kind of orange, yellow, blue on the kind of black background, it does kind of stand out, and that I think it will look nice when we finally get to see pictures of the characters, especially because the characters are going to be older and it's all going to be amazing to see when it actually happens. So that out of the way, let's talk about the date, because this is basically the entire discussion here. I think ultimately is that any hype surrounding the fact that it's public information is, I think, unfortunately a bit offset by the fact that the movie's been delayed by eight months. Again, it's super late January, the 30th, into early October, so it's more like 8 months rather than the full 9. But it's still, it changes the complete part of the year the movie's actually coming out in, and it's much bigger of a delay than I think any of us expected. And I do think it was reasonable to expect a delay. I was expecting a delay for this movie at some point. I just wasn't expecting it to be this big. I was thinking on the lower end of things, they'll adjust it out of January just so it's not in January, just so it's maybe in like March or April or something like that, and it feels a little bit better. If they were doing something a little bit more extreme, I was thinking maybe into June or July, just so you're super far away from James Cameron's Avatar movie in December, and you're more leaning into maybe the start of the second half of the year, and it's just in a slightly better position. But didn't predict October. Now the question is, why? Have they just moved it to be sort of selective, choosing a nice part of the year, and that production's actually going perfectly fine, and they just want it in October for whatever reason? It's a very big delay. It's a pretty big thing to do, kind of just on a, it's better in October than January. So I do think there's more to this than meets the eye. I do think this probably suggests there is some sort of a production problem where they need the time to make it happen. Because you have to tie into this the fact that what news did we get just a few days ago? And that was Studio Mir they randomly, kind of out of nowhere, announced that Studio Mir are helping out with the production on this movie. Now, the wording on that is very weird about what exactly this is about. But as far as we were aware, as of a few weeks ago, the production on that movie was done. And now we're hearing about Studio Mir are on board and there's been a giant delay. It's kind of hard to not go, did something happen with Flying Bark? Was there a problem with the finished production that Studio Mir is having to come in? And on the extreme end of things, you're kind of thinking, like, have they just decided that, hey, whatever Flying Bark did is not good enough? Studio Mir come in and save the day, Avatar animation perfectly. And that's why they're hiring, because it's like a emergency coming on board and they need a ton of people type thing. I still don't really know the full scope of this, because again, they didn't say why there's a delay. It's just speculation about what's happening here, because on animations this sort of stuff does happen, where like other animation studios will just come on board just to help out, and it's not only because it's an emergency. Like sometimes it does just happen, but in this case it does feel a little bit like a lot of this adds together to give me the impression that maybe something bad has happened, and it's kind of hard to not go down that road if you've been following this closely, because it just feels like it kind of reads kind of badly ultimately. This also, I think, helps to explain stuff like, say, why did the information about Paramount at the Annecy Film Festival suddenly disappear? Well, I guess at the time that kind of press release, maybe information was written, they were planning to have the movie there because it was coming out in January. But now, of course, probably isn't. I'm guessing at CinemaCon they roughly knew that they were probably going to have to delay things, even if their quote-unquote production was going well, and that's why we didn't really get significant information coming out of that. Now, maybe they might still have something in Annecy. There's still a good few weeks to go until the Annecy Film Festival. It's like next month. But the way it's kind of going now, it does sort of feel like this movie's too far out at this point in October next year to appear there. On maybe the slightly more positive end of things, this links into perhaps the Seven Havens in 2027 information in a little bit of a better way, where all of a sudden it's like, there we go, there's the Avatar Studios connection of like the projects kind of hitting back to back. October 2026 into at some point in 2027 is going to feel a lot better, because we're assuming it's probably going to be maybe early, maybe mid 2027. And so the gap between the movie and the first show might be as low as a couple of months to maybe as high as maybe 6 or 9 months or something like that. And that feels a lot better than maybe over a year between projects. And they seem to really want that, at least 2 things hitting back to back. So that helps to explain all that stuff, kind of highlighting that, a lot of the other information was actually, in hindsight, maybe leading us down the road of like, yeah, the delay is probably coming for the movie here, because it didn't really feel like we were building up to a January release. Nothing was kind of happening in that direction, even though a few places were still kind of echoing the January release date. But the other stuff is that, like, yeah, they wouldn't change this on a whim because of what this does to so much else that's happening in Avatar. This suddenly means that stuff like, say, the toy line has to probably quite heavily adjust what they're doing. Now, it's not going to be maybe absolute disaster, because it seems like the toy line is kind of constructed in a way where, yeah, they can just add in the movie stuff whenever the movie stuff is actually ready to go, ready to come out. But it might be a situation where they were planning the movie stuff to be like a wave 2 or 3. Now it's going to have to be more of a wave 5 or 6 because of this delay. And depending on when they designed them, put them into production, they might have to hold back and like keep information about these toys they have produced out of the public for a really long time because of this delay. That they were under the impression as of a few weeks ago, toys need to be ready for January. Now it's hold back on them until October. That's a pretty big ask. The same goes for like publishing. There's probably a lot of publishing stuff that was planned originally for for January and February for the release of this movie, and now just over the last month or so has probably had to shift quite heavily to actually no, hold back on that, make sure no information comes out about that, because we're building up to October. That just the change of the date of this movie affects everything that surrounds what's happening here. So I wonder how a lot of that stuff is actually going to kind of go at this point. Of course, the toy line was always initially scheduled as like ATLA toy line first, and then it will bring in the other stuff, but it's messier than they would want. And that's why, like, you have to kind of consider it that, yeah, they're not just changing these dates on a whim, especially that significantly, unless something serious has gone wrong, just because of the amount of extra time, money, effort that probably has to happen now because of this. Potentially extra animation, reanimation stuff, if that's what Studio Mir has been brought on to do. That's very unfortunate. Who knows what the situation with Flying Bark now is as in, like, were they not the studio that we needed after all, or did they just need a little bit of help? Like, there's a big difference between those two kind of angles on it. That's what's so interesting to consider with the kind of situation that we kind of find ourselves in at this point. And the other kind of angle on it as well is that it just changes our perceptions for the rest of the year. Because I think otherwise we went into, at either SDCC or NYCC this year, prior to today, we were absolutely, I think, expecting news of some sort at either or both of those conventions. That I think they basically had to have an Avatar Studios panel of some sort. Now it kind of feels like SDCC is going to be 15 months before the movie. NYCC is now maybe positioned reasonably well at 1 year to go. I still feel they probably have to say something, but it changes from there has to be a blowout at one of these things to, well, I think they'll say something at one of them. And that is a little bit unfortunate, because you have to think that, like, now we look ahead to maybe like next year, and all of a sudden, well, the movie now probably is going to be maybe a highlight movie at CinemaCon next year, because we're going to get through a February basically. So it's going to have to appear there. It can appear at Annecy next year as well, and that's the kind of funny thing as well. It's slightly offset, but it still allows that to happen. But the timing also means that, like, if they release a trailer, let's say 4 months beforehand, that means the trailer is out before San Diego Comic-Con. And then, of course, New York Comic-Con would be after this as well. And I think they would want to have said something about Avatar Studios projects at one convention. So it puts it in this weird situation where if they don't say anything at the cons this year, they're only talking about it like 3 months maybe beforehand next year. Now, again, I think we were always expecting maybe them to talk more about the series at the conventions rather than the movie. But it still means that, like, the movie is a kind of in an odd position in terms of when are we going to get information on it. And and that whole sort of thing. But yeah, it definitely changes the rest of the year. It completely, I think, shifts our focus back to publishing. The novels coming out in the year, that's going to now be the main event for the year, rather than like anything else, build up to other stuff. Because otherwise, regardless of what the situation was, if the movie was still coming out in January, trailer was coming out this year at some point. Now that's obviously not going to be the case. Like, I'd be very surprised if we saw animation from this year. I still think we might see like an image from one of the cons this year, but it very much changes a lot going forward. The other pieces of news, very quickly, publishing stuff, might be slightly related, but probably not. Light It Up, so Bending Academy #1, our other novel for the year, our first middle grade novel from Random House, delayed from September to November 18th, 2025. It is like a 2.5 month delay, so it's a somewhat significant delay. It goes from being the, I think, second novel released to now it's going to be the last novel released, because of course City of Echoes is out in July and Awakening of Roku is going to be an October release. So we're still waiting on the cover from this. I'm assuming San Diego Comic-Con with a publishing panel will still have to deliver on this side of things. And also we have I Am Sokka, which again might be an SDCC or NYCC reveal. With a January 6th release date for I Am Sokka, I'm assuming SDCC probably is maybe where they reveal this, but we'll see. So yeah, the 5th I Am book is going to be Sokka. They've already done, of course, Aang, Zuko, Katara, and Toph. I don't know how many more of these they can do after this, just because we're getting a little bit more into, like, Suki would complete the full Team Avatar set, but you're kind of running out of characters that I think you would reasonably do in this series, and that, like I kind of don't think they do, like, an I Am Azula. I'm not sure if they do an I Am Iroh, and I think most other characters maybe don't fit the mold of this style of book, so might they switch over to I Am Korra, which I think a lot of people would actually really like to see. But yeah, I think publishing suddenly jumps back into the spotlight as being, yeah, I think this is where most of the news for the rest of the year is going to be. Because Dark Horse, of course, have nothing at the moment. Obviously, Beast of the Four Nations in a couple of months, that's going to be exciting. But beyond that, what are they doing next? When's the next ATLA one-shot, Korra one-shot, the comic miniseries? Like, does that get affected by things? Because if the comic miniseries, as maybe some were suspecting, was maybe a tie-in prequel kind of book for the movie, they can't release that at this point with the thing so heavily delayed. So, you know, does stuff like that begin to happen as well? And you see how kind of interconnected everything is. What will suddenly stop happening and what is going to happen into the future? Because the novels are going to be fine going forward, because they're basically not overly connected to, like, what Avatar Studio is doing in terms of the animation too much. The comics could be, because I think they've clearly been on hold to a certain degree because of the new stuff. So the new stuff finally happening might open the door for the comics to do more. Is that going to change? Magpie, you know, we're still waiting to see what they do next, and some other stuff, you know, we're waiting to see what happens. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on this big news here. Legend of Aang: The Last Airbender, now out October 9th, 2026. We have the official Instagram page for this, and we have the logo. What do you think here? Obviously, like, I want to hear your guys' speculation as well, because that's the big thing. We still have no clue the full extent of what's happening behind the scenes. We can speculate, we can try to connect the dots as best as we can, but we're still going in the dark a little bit here. We can assume a few things maybe, but we still don't know what the full scope of what's actually happened here is to make a lot of this stuff happen. Hopefully we'll get some insight into it as we go forward, but while it's nice to finally get a really public post, it's also never nice to get a giant delay like this, as potentially understandable as it might be. Obviously, no one is asking for them to rush the movie out just to get it out. Everyone understands animation takes a long time. we just want a little bit more information, I think, is the main thing. But yeah, there's the end of the video, so thanks for watching, and bye.